Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining today's call. It's Customers First Now in our CX Leader webinar series. We usually hold these webinars monthly on a variety of topics about customer experience, customer success, and journey mapping topics. In today's session, we're going to be hearing from Carrie Nelson, our CEO and President of Customers First Now. She's going to be discussing the common cultural barriers found in B2B companies and how to overcome them as a CX leader. But before we begin, just a few key things to note. Yes, we are recording today's session for future download and replay purposes. You'll receive an email from us with links to access that recording at the end. And anytime during the session, you can submit your questions by going to the Q&A panel on your WebEx control panel. Select the Ask Host and enter your questions into the box and click Send. You can ask as many questions as you like, and we'll try to answer as many as time allows. So thanks again for joining us today, and now I will turn it over to Carrie.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. So we're going to talk about B2B, and from my experience, I spent 25 years in B2B, and 10 of those years leading CX. At CFN, we work with a lot of B2B companies, but a lot of B2C companies that do also do B2B. So when we talk about business to business, for those that have joined us today and that will listen to the recording, it's really as you think about even if you're in B2C, if you're doing things with partners and others, it is that business-to-business environment we're going to be focused on for today's session. So one of the interesting things to kick off is we saw this from Gallup, which is, and this doesn't surprise me, and I don't think it'll surprise any of you, but 29% of B2B customers are engaged, so a third, let's call it. 60% are indifferent. 11% are actively disengaged. And I think this comes down to what we'll talk about with these cultural barriers. So when I look at stats like this, all I see is opportunity. This is great. This is not even bad news. This is great news, because what it says is if you're in B2B in any role around customer experience, customer success, voice of the customer, there is a great opportunity to engage your customers and your team members, which we'll talk a lot about, to really delight your customers, quite frankly. So let's talk about the three big cultural barriers. So the first thing I would start with in the orange you'll see is, what is the definition of culture? So this is always a topic with my customers we have is, well, what is culture? And when you start talking about culture, everyone's eyes glaze over and they're like, oh my God, we're going to talk about culture now. And, but at the end of the day, this is a technical definition, the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. No wonder no one wants to talk about culture. But when I think of culture, culture is people, and it's the behaviors of your teams internally. What does that look like? That's your culture. How do people behave? How do they respond? How do they engage with each other? What's teamwork look like? It is the behaviors of your team internally, just to keep it very simple, because every company has a set of behaviors that you will see immediately. Good, bad, ugly. It's usually a mix of everything. So when we talk about culture, I'm really talking about those behaviors internally. So what are the three things I've experienced? I've personally experienced these things, these cultural barriers, and I know my customers do too. So the first one we're going to talk through, I'm just going to go through each of these high level. 80% of team members do not interact or ever talk to a customer. In a very, B2B environment, it's at least 80% are in roles that are supporting people that are talking to the customer. So that's one barrier. Number two, there are silos. So I know this may seem obvious, but there's ways to work very effectively with silos. But in B2B, the silos are usually very distinct, very much focused on outcomes within that silo, and there's always good reasons for that. And the last one is in B2B, and again, from my personal experience, the heroes and the focus is product and sales, and that doesn't mean it has anything to do with the customer. So those are the 3 areas we're going to talk about. So let's start with 80% of the colleague base. What I always share with people is that when I was a CX leader and I reported to the CEOs of these companies, is that 90% of my job was what I did with the team members internally. And sometimes that shocks people. But if you really think about what you're trying to achieve to improve your customer experience, the only way to do that is through the team members internally. So the thing, I kind of have 4 techniques here that I've used and our customers have used. The first one is defining your customer. So in B2B, one of the techniques I've used is defining the customer in a way that everyone in the company has a customer. So in my last company, we had about 5,000 team members, worldwide, 140 offices. Again, 80% don't talk to a customer. So one of the things the CEO and I agreed to, and again, you need to get this top-down alignment, is we said a customer is anyone you serve. That was the definition. And so when you think about it that way, and when we rolled that definition out and we reinforced it with communication and training, it was so powerful over time because every single person, all 5,000 people had a customer. And they were as important as everybody else in the company. So a real-life example I would give you is our legal team. One of the goals we had was improving and simplifying the number of order forms and simplifying our T's and C's. And these things were really getting in the way of sales being successful as well as customers being able to get started on our products. So the legal team had a very important role. And when we rolled out this definition and we linked that to what they had to do to serve the salespeople, they took this ownership and accountability to the ultimate level, to the point of we were at a sales conference here in Denver where 2,000 salespeople come in, and we had a whole 3-day event. And the legal team sets up a booth and hands out buttons. And the buttons say, I heart legal. Now those buttons, I personally thought it was a bad idea, but it was okay because it was like their idea, and if they thought salespeople were going to wear the button, then good for them. Well, the salespeople wore the buttons. Every salesperson was wearing a I heart legal button. It was unbelievable. And what was wonderful with that example is that this definition of who's your customer driving to accountability, and that both sides of the equation recognized it, the legal team and the sales team. The sales team wouldn't have worn the button if they didn't think that legal was truly treating them as a customer. The second thing is to bring your customer feedback to life inside the company. The key here is, most companies I talk to do surveys. And there are effective surveys and there are not effective surveys. To have an effective survey, again, it's not just about listening to your customer's feedback. It is, how are you communicating that internally to your team members? How are you connecting the dots? How are you showing that the feedback you're getting, and the positive and the opportunity areas, and how that links back to specific teams, and then how are you engaging them to understand the feedback and act on the feedback? So the survey is a great tool and a technique to bring the team members closer to the customer. They want to see this. They want to read it. They want to feel it. The third one here is training. And, again, training, it can be used in a lot of very helpful ways. What I would say is, be very purposeful around what you're going to train on. Spend some time understanding your employee survey feedback if you do an employee survey. See where people say the gaps are. I mean, one example I have, which I show here, is like responsiveness. You know, I had an example here where I looked at the employee survey, and the employees, there were 2 questions in the survey, which one asked the question, are we responsive to each other? And they had responded no. And then there was another question, do we respond to our customers? And the answer was yes. I'm very much simplifying this, but that was the tone of each of the responses of 5,000 people. And then you can imagine and guess what the answer was when I looked at the customer survey, which was the customer said, well, no, you're not responsive. So understanding culturally and behaviorally what you're dealing with internally is very important. Do you have a responsiveness issue? Do you have an accountability? Do people get things done? Do they not get things done? Are they good with teamwork? You know, I mean, so really understand what you're trying to solve, and training can be a really wonderful solution to that. And lastly, understanding and mapping out the customer journey. So there's lots of ways to do this, but really getting from the time a customer joins you to the time a customer leaves or returns, what does that look like? How are you mapping that, and how are you sharing that internally? And we'll talk a little bit more about mapping as it relates to one of the other barriers, but it is another very good tool to bring the customer experience to life, and for people to look at the map and say, gosh, I kind of help here, you know, with invoicing, or I help here with some of the marketing stuff I do, or I help over here where, you know, there may be something on onboarding that someone's doing to provide some content for the person that does the onboarding. So it really is another great way to bring it to life in a very visual fashion. So that's our first one. So let's move on to our second one, silos. So there's a lot about silos, good and bad, but I prefer to think of them as good. Silos exist for a reason. They are good because they do drive performance within a silo with a strong leader. So silos can be very effective. There's reasons they exist. However, silos need to be connected. So I love this quote here. You know, you can't break down silos. I mean, you can try really hard, but you will not be successful. So what you have to do is connect them, because you can connect them. So how do you connect silos? And in B2B, this is very, you know, this is how we do business. You know, in both companies where I spent 25 years and then led CX, you know, I didn't spend a lot of time trying to figure out why the silos exist. I mean, they just, it is what it is. You got to understand there are things you can control and things that you cannot. In that environment, it's what can you do to connect people and get them talking to each other, sharing best practices, sharing common goals, you know, being on the same team at the company level. That's what you're trying to do. And that's why customer experience is a very exciting space, because you don't own everything. And so how do you bring those people together? So I give a couple examples on ways to connect here in the orange box. I mean, one is governance. From a best practice, the most successful CX teams I see have some sort of a council, a steering team, a governance team, whatever you want to call it, whatever works in your environment. But this is your top-down approach. Getting the right executives across the business, across the various silos together once a month in a room to really discuss the customer. You know, what are we doing well? What do we need to improve? How are we measuring our success? You know, and then also sharing best practices. What's working? Where are people struggling? You know, this is a great way to come together as an organization and have those discussions, but be very clear on your outcomes as well. A scorecard. We do a lot of building of scorecards with our customers. Our customers do this. I've done this, where you are building a scorecard not just based on, you know, what sales is doing, what marketing is doing, what product's doing, but a combined scorecard that says, here are the 10 things across the company that matter most to our customers. And it could be invoicing, improving billing. It could, you know, the things that are not the most obvious things, because sometimes they matter the most. So having a company-wide scorecard is also another way to connect silos. And then lastly, any kind of cross-functional initiatives. So, a couple examples I can think of is when you're implementing, let's say, a CRM across the company, or you're implementing, we did at one of my last companies, SAP, to reduce 30 billing systems down to 1 was the ultimate goal. But you can imagine a quote-to-cash process that involves almost every single person in the organization. And that was very cross-functional in how we had to understand the process, improve the process, implement, a billing system that was going to work across the board from a quote-to-cash. So, cross-functional initiatives are very important to also, pick a few of those that are part of your program. Again, it's a great way to demonstrate teamwork. And then our last one is really an interesting one for B2B. So this is the focus on products and sales. And in my background in B2B, I've led product lines and teams and such. So I've been on both sides of this. The heroes definitely that get a lot of attention are salespeople because they face the customers. They're that less than 20%. And the product teams, because there's a perception that product people know a lot what the customers want and they're building the greatest next thing. What I find, though, is that there are so many other groups as important to these folks. Sales and product people can't be successful without all these other teams supporting them, the other 80%, because why did the other 80% exist? So you have customer service, you have onboarding, you have delivery of product, you have invoicing. As examples, typically are not the real, cool areas to work in a B2B environment. Now, and I've worked in all those areas, and I know that. And, I always had this goal to make them the coolest, we want to be in this group area as possible, because they are very important. And one of the things on the last bullet is when you understand your customer journey, it is really fascinating to see how these little things really are the big things. And so I'm going to give you an example here as we go to the next slide. So, in looking at a journey, what we want to, this is just a generic example so that you get the framework I'm talking about. So when we do journey maps, we really look at the end-to-end. These gray, red, yellow, green boxes are all the touch points, again, in a very simple way. But the thing that we've studied over the last 10 years across many, many journey maps, hundreds of journey maps, is, in B2B, we looked at 110 journey maps across 9 industries. What we looked at is where are the pain points and the moments of truth happening the most? Because there are themes that we see. And so that's the red. You have yellow, which are your pain points. Most companies have a lot of pain points, but you're not going to try to fix all of them because they don't all add value to the customer. They're not going to be that important that if you fix them one way or the other, the customer leaves you, stays with you, spends more money. They're not going to do anything with their buying behavior. So you're always trying to find where are the ones that have moments of truth, like the greens. So the greens mean it's a moment of truth, but it's working. So they matter a lot to get those right. The reds are when it's both a moment of truth and a pain point. So I'm going to talk about the reds. So let's go to the next slide. Now, as we studied these 110 maps, what we found is these are the commonalities we saw. In all of the touch points, we looked at what were the top touch points that had both a moment of truth and a pain point. And so you'll see this bar graph from quote and the proposal to a quarterly annual business review, which happen a lot in B2B as part of the deepening the relationship, to delivery of the product, to the things marketing and communication send to the customer, to kick off, that's your onboarding, there's some training, invoice issues, issue resolution that happens in customer service or technical support, the negotiation that happens upstream with sales, referred to another team, so somehow there's been a pass-off, and accepted sign-off of the contract, which happens in the early engagement, decide stage. So you can see when you look at these areas, I mean, it really crosses the entire business. You can't just solve this from sales. You can't just solve this with product. You have to involve a lot of teams to solve some of these issues, and these are the most common issues that we see. And I will tell you, like the quote proposal, the invoice, delivery, I mean, all of those are just as common to every map that we do in B2B, and I would say also in B2C to some extent. So this is, again, to give you an example of some real data points when we look at these maps. So with that, kind of as we go to, because I really want to go to Q&A, so let's go to the Q&A. Really give you guys a chance to kind of digest what I just covered, and I'd love to hear some questions or other thoughts if you have other techniques you use. I'd love to hear that. So let's go to the line, Anthony.
Okay. So we have a couple of questions coming in, and please feel free to go into your Q&A panel and enter your question if you have a question for Carrie on these topics. Let me give you this question, Carrie. Are surveys to B2B customers different than B2C customers?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is it depends. The thing with surveys are, the thing I always look at, the first thing is the survey, whatever you're using, whether you're using an NPS, like a Net Promoter Score, or you're using an index, some sort of a 4 to 5 question combo, the key is, what really matters is that you've done the work to understand that score, what they say and how they've rated you, is predictive of what they're going to do from a buying behavior. So 2 things I see consistently. One is that analysis is not getting done. So there's NPS is being picked because it's the most common out there. And regardless if it's predictive or not, there's a lot of actioning going on about that score. So the first thing to do is make sure whatever you do, you start with anything. But then you have to do the analysis to understand that linkage. The second thing I see a lot is that NPS doesn't necessarily work very well with B2B. It did not work in the 2 companies I led. I actually built a couple of indexes that were 4 to 5 questions around the highest value items of why do they buy from us. There was a value question, a product question, a customer experience question, and a brand question as an example. And so I built an index that would give, again, a customer in a B2B environment, like why you do business with us, whether you're a decision maker, that you made the decision, or you're the end user using our product, I wanted to make sure it was a relevant questions for both sets. That's very unique to B2B, because we're always focused on the decision maker, and actually those end users are so important to influencing the decision maker. So there are some differences. And at the end of the day, it comes back to, when you're doing your survey, just make sure that whatever you're picking to measure is linked to the buying behavior, and it's relevant to your customers. Great.
I just want to remind everybody also that the video and the link for this webinar will be shared at the end. We had a question on that. So, Carrie, here's another question for you based on, I think, one of your earlier slides. How do you motivate other silo leaders to participate in the CX initiative?
That is a wonderful question, and it's a hard one, when you're in that situation, because you know really quickly who really cares and who doesn't. It's not, and actually, to be fair, it's not necessarily if they care or not. Everyone cares. It's, people are, again, very busy doing what they're supposed to do and what they're goaled to do. So when faced with that scenario, this gets back to kind of an overall governance and a scorecard approach. To get everybody on the same page, you really have to make sure there's common goals, and this starts at the top of the organization. So where I've seen in B2B this does happen, where people, they get very much into their business. I run my business, I'm going to go do it this way, and just don't bother me. I've been that way. I mean, I've had my own product lines, and I, want to run it the way I want to run it. And I don't want somebody else trying to help me if I don't feel like I need help. So what you do is, this is where, again, working with the CEO, the COO, president, someone that has some influence over the silos, is to make sure that you're partnering closely with that person to come up with a way that you're goaling, or from a performance management across the team, how are you setting consistent goals that we're all sharing, so whether that's an NPS score or an index, that's a start, to get everybody on the same page, or it might be specific initiatives you're all going after. But to get somebody focused, it's not just about showing up at a meeting, that's not going to work. I've seen that approach. People show up and then, they walk away and they check the box that they were at your meeting. So shared goals, shared accountability to get things done, and shared vision of what matters. And, it's building that, but again, top down, because that is really critical to, getting each of the different businesses and the different operations that work towards this together. And again, some of the techniques we talked about, whether that's, a journey mapping initiative that brings people together so they can start to see the aha moments, or a survey program where you measure it and everyone's goals to the success of that. Again, it gets to shared accountability and shared goals.
Do you have time for another question?
Yes.
So you had mentioned increasing customer engagement. I think it was at 29% on the slide, or 30%. Can you talk a little bit more about the methods to increase customer engagement based on your first slide, if you want to go back?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I understand the question. Again, there's not a silver bullet to that. It's overcoming these cultural barriers. You have to understand what your barriers are first. Look at your employee survey data, know what you're dealing with, and address it. So, there's some techniques there. So start with employee engagement. Where is your employee engagement? How engaged are your employees? And spend some time on that. I mean, I had one CEO who said, we're not even going to start focusing actively on the customer. I mean, of course, we were doing things with the customer, but until we could get our employee engagement and get the culture, really better defined and consistent. And so we did that for 3 years at my first company I did this at. And I think that, that's one approach to start. And then it's kind of a phrase I always use is start slow to speed up. Bring people along with you before you just go and attack the things that you think are important to the customer. And then the second thing is, to really drive the engagement from a customer perspective, is to ensure you are working on the things that matter to them, and not just matter to you as a business, or that you think might matter, and go beyond the pain points to really get to the to what we talked about, moments that matter, or moments of truth, whatever you call them, because those are the things that will, if you don't get it right, it will drive a different buying behavior, less or leave, things like that.
Okay. Looks like that's all of our questions for now.
Yeah, so let's give people time back, but I know we have a couple call to actions here, Anthony.
Yeah, so we invite everybody on the call to take advantage of a free complimentary 30-minute meeting with Carrie to discuss what you heard today and how it might apply to you and your business. And as part of this, you can also take our best practice assessment. It's a really nice survey that we package up for you and give you some custom data that's based on your answers. And you can take advantage of both of those things simply by emailing me at my address here on the page, asanchez@customersfirstnow.com. And again, just as a reminder, the recordings will be available on our website at customersfirstnow.com/events. and, of course, the links to those. So, again, thank you for attending our webinar, and this is, we will have another webinar next month. And, again, if you have any other questions about the session, please let us know. Thank you, Carrie, for a great presentation, and thank you all for attending.
Great. Have a great rest of the week. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thanks,
you.
Anthony.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.